Have you ever wondered how hackers break into systems, whether it's a web server or a personal computer, and use things like reverse shells or payloads to gain complete access to that system? Well, that's exactly what I'll be covering in this video, walking you through the different ways hackers can compromise a targeted system, the tools they rely on, and unique scenarios where each of these techniques come into play. So let's get started. This video is sponsored by Any.Run, more on that later.
Disclaimer.
The following content is intended for cybersecurity enthusiasts and is for educational or awareness purposes only. It does not provide a step-by-step guide on how systems are hacked, but rather discusses the techniques used by hackers to do so. Black hat hacking is highly discouraged and can result in serious legal consequences.
Chapter number 1, Passive Attack Vectors.
Okay, so when it comes to hacking computer systems, there are two main types of attacks, called active attacks and passive attacks. Active attacks require the user to take an action, like clicking on a link or plugging in a malicious USB, while passive attacks require no user interaction, allowing the attacker to silently infiltrate a system without leaving a trace. In this chapter, we'll be focusing on passive attacks that require no user interaction, and break down how they work, while exploring the tools that make them possible. So let's get started.
Attack Vector 1, exploiting systems running vulnerable services on a local network.
Starting with the basics, imagine a hacker who's managed to gain access to a corporate's internal network, and is now looking for a way to hack any of the systems connected to that network. For this, he starts by running a tool called Nmap, which basically scans for all the devices connected to that network, and identifies the following systems running vulnerable services or protocols on that network. If you don't know already, protocols are a set of rules that tell a device what to do or how to communicate over a network, and if any devices or systems connected to a network are running a vulnerable protocol, either due to security misconfigurations or outdated software, a hacker can use that protocol to deliver a malware or payload to that system, and remotely get access without the user of that system doing anything. This is made possible with the help of another tool called Metasploit. And just to give you an idea, if we take this system which was running a vulnerable SMB protocol on port 445 within Nmap, a hacker could use Metasploit to search for an exploit related to SMB within its database, and then use that exploit to deliver a malware or payload to that system. Now, if you're not familiar with what Metasploit is or how a hacker might do this, don't worry, a detailed video on it is coming out soon.
A quick note.
Even if a system is running a vulnerable service or protocol, a hacker would still need to obfuscate their payloads to evade antivirus detection, and this can be done by either encrypting the payload, or leveraging the Windows built-in features to execute it.
Attack Vector 2, exploiting systems running vulnerable services over the internet.
Okay, so now that we know how a system can be hacked if it is running a vulnerable service or protocol over a network, the question is, what if we're not physically close to that network? Can a hacker still break into a system in that case? Well, yes, but only if that system is exposed to the internet, and indexed on a service like Shodan. If you don't know already, Shodan is basically a search engine that searches for devices exposed to the internet, and so if we wanted to look for systems running vulnerable services or protocols over the internet, we could simply use a search filter like port, and input a number like 445, which as we discussed was the default port used for SMB. Now if the hacker was targeting a specific company or an organization, they could also narrow down their search using another filter like ORG, but for now, just know that once a system is identified, the hacker can simply copy its public IP address, run a detailed scan on it using Nmap, and if the system is still active, they can proceed with running Metasploit to exploit it, similar to how they would on a local network.
A quick note.
Routers and firewalls often block incoming connections from outside a local network, making it harder for an attacker to interact with a system over the internet, and so in order to bypass this, hackers often use something called a reverse shell module within Metasploit, which tricks the targeted system into connecting back to the attacker instead of the other way around. And if you're not sure about what shells mean or why they're an essential part of system hacking, don't worry, I'll cover all of that in the upcoming video on Metasploit.
Attack Vector 3, setup vulnerabilities and zero-day exploits.
Finally, hackers can also gain access to a system either by taking advantage of setup vulnerabilities left behind by system administrators, or by buying zero-day vulnerabilities from underground forums or exploit brokers. If you don't know already, zero-day vulnerabilities are essentially security flaws that haven't been discovered or patched by a software vendor yet, which makes them extremely valuable for hackers, since they can even allow access to a fully secured system.
Chapter number 2, Active Attack Vectors.
Okay, so now that we've discussed the attack vectors that don't require any action from the user, and are usually more effective when done against corporate systems, let's take a look at some of the other ones that are effective against both corporate and individual systems, but require some action to be taken by their users.
Attack Vector 1, generating payloads for delivery via USB or social engineering.
Okay, so the first and most common way to hack a system using an active attack vector is by generating a payload using a tool like Metasploit, which is then delivered through a pen drive or a phishing email, requiring the target to either plug in the USB, or download and execute the payload manually. Now if you're interested in learning about how this is done, you can search on Google for more information, but for now, just know that a hacker would use a tool called MSF Venom within Metasploit to generate the deliverable file, and in order to do that, they would typically choose a payload, set their own IP as the listener, and define how the compromised system should communicate once the file is executed. Speaking of executing malicious files, social engineering is still the most common way of hacking computer systems worldwide, and this is where the sponsor of this video Any.Run comes into play. Any.Run is a cloud-based sandbox that helps businesses and professionals analyze how a malware operates by running it in a controlled environment, and unlike using traditional virtual machines, it offers some unique advantages, such as securely isolating threats to prevent malware from escaping into your network, or providing access to a vast library of samples to choose from. Its interface is designed to be beginner-friendly while remaining powerful enough for experts, and includes various tools that let you view all the network connections a malware is making, or the commands it is executing, which by the way is also a great way for analysts to quickly identify threats, and make faster decisions before they escalate. What makes it even better is its teamwork feature, allowing a team to efficiently collaborate in a shared workspace, or the safe browsing tool, which lets you determine the safety of a website within seconds, and enables you to decide whether to block specific entities or not. To try it out, you can visit their updated website, and sign up using your university or business email, to get the most out of this amazing tool at an unbeatable price. Thanks for listening, let's get back to the video.
Attack Vector 2, gaining GUI-based access to a system.
Okay, so up until now, all we've talked about were payloads which were generated through Metasploit and allowed access to a system through a command line interface. But when it comes to actively hacking a system through social engineering, hackers also have the option to generate a GUI-based payload using various rat programs found on GitHub, and gain graphical access to a system without needing to remember any commands. Now if you're wondering why hackers can't also deliver a GUI-based payload to a system running a vulnerable service or protocol, it's because these payloads are often larger and more complex, making them easier to detect and harder to deliver passively. However, if a hacker first compromises a system using a lightweight payload, they can later install a GUI-based rat for long-term control, and this is also true for when they want to install other types of malware like ransomware or spyware.
Attack Vector 3, hardware-based attacks.
Finally, hackers can also gain access to a system either by taking advantage of a tool like the USB rubber ducky, which once inserted to a system, can type pre-programmed commands at lightning-fast speed to install a payload automatically, or by deploying a tool like the LAN turtle, which when connected to a switch or a router, creates a backdoor that gives hackers remote access to a local network. Now while these attacks might seem unlikely, it's important to note that a hacker would only need a few seconds to install these tools effectively, which basically makes any system vulnerable once accessed physically, no matter how secure it might be. Anyway guys, so that's it for the video. Before ending, I'd like to point that while we covered a bunch of concepts here, there are still some things like post-exploitation or C2 servers that I'd highly recommend you exploring on your own, as they're also an essential part of system hacking. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comment section down below, and I'll see you in the next one.